Welcome to this afternoon. This is our penultimate webinar. The next one is the last one, and that's on PRISM 360. That's sometime in June. If you've missed any of the preceding ones, and bear in mind they're all about different PRISM applications. If you've missed any of the preceding ones, then obviously they're all available in resources. So do have a look at those. If you've got any webinars that you think we should run that we haven't, bear in mind we've still got the 361 to go, then just let us know and we'll see what we can do. So today is all about benchmarking, and it's quite a lot of Blue Peter moments going on in this one in terms of here's one we made earlier. So I've created some benchmarks, some benchmark planners, some comparisons, which I'll be flicking between. So hopefully that's fairly seamless, but I dare say Lisa will let me know if it's not. So first thing to cover is what's the purpose of a benchmark? So why do we have a benchmark? So the benchmark is basically a way of looking at what a role looks like. So in PRISM terms, we have candidates that we capture through the questionnaire, and we then have the output in terms of the map, and we can have a benchmark map, which is a similar thing, but instead of looking at the candidate, it looks at a particular role. And we can create the benchmark through something called a benchmark planner. So having established what the role looks like, we can then compare it to various candidates, and we can use that for recruitment and perhaps even for development. So if you're coaching a leader and you want to understand how they fit with perhaps a leadership profile for that particular organization that they work in, then you could create a benchmark and you could compare them against that. Some of the best coaching conversations that I've had are where we've had a really good benchmark, with a high level of credibility, and I've coached someone against that benchmark, and it's really easy then to see areas that they're good at, where perhaps they need to do more of, areas where there's some development required, and also areas where they might be overdoing it. So a benchmark can be really good for development as well as recruitment. So today we're going to cover those three stages. So we're going to create a benchmark. We're going to use the benchmark planner. We're going to create the benchmark. We're going to then show you what that benchmark looks like once we've created it, and we're going to interpret it. So we compare that benchmark to a number of different candidates. You can see how easy that is. So first step is to think about who needs to be involved in the process. So there's a massive health warning here that when you're creating a benchmark, don't create it just on a whim. You need to involve people that are doing the job, possibly people that are managing that particular role. You need to look at the job profile. So you have a lot of information that you can call on that will help you understand what that role actually looks like. And as the saying goes, rubbish in, rubbish out. If you don't have that integrity early on, then your benchmark won't have the integrity at a later stage. So be absolutely clear that the data you are using to create the benchmark is absolutely correct. Involve the people that you need to involve. If you're using a job profile, be absolutely clear that that job profile is correct. We've all come across jobs where we've seen a job profile, thought, oh, that sounds good, but it's nothing like the job that's actually being completed. So, of course, establish that the job benchmark has a high level of integrity. And we're going to use a job benchmark for our first session, but of course, it is a job benchmark that we are confident has integrity. And I'm going to share that with you, and I'll show you how we go about turning that job benchmark into the benchmark planner. Let's find that for you. Okay, so Lisa will no doubt tell me if you can't see this, but you should be able to see now the Emerald Pharmaceutical Services Supply Chain Manager. So a little bit of information at the beginning. This is only 2 pages, this particular job profile. Some obviously are much more than that. One of the things that I find really useful when I'm looking at creating a benchmark from a job profile is to go through and underline where I think a particular dimension, a particular behavior is evident. So you can see here, under the role summary, that I've highlighted some areas that I think fit with delivering, the first 2, some that fit with finishing and evaluating, and then the next one, delivering and coordinating. And I've done that all the way through. This section here, what we're looking for is more about eligibility than suitability. So I haven't made any particular comments on that section. Right, if we go through, continue from page 1, so you can see I've carried on with that notation process. And at the end of this particular profile, you can very easily see that there's probably a lot more gold, some blue, some red, but a lot more gold than anything else. And I think very little green on this particular job profile. Oh, there's one little bit of green down here, initiating. That gives you some idea, some sort of overview of what we might be putting on the job benchmark planner when we got to that stage. And if you're having a consultation with other people, so if you're using the job profile, but you're also consulting with the person that does the role and the manager of that role, ask them what they actually do. So ask questions like, if I came in and watched you day to day, what would I see you doing? So really try and get to the nitty gritty of what this job involves, what responsibility they have, what are the key result areas. So really pin down what it is that they actually do. So from the job profile or from the consultation, we then move into the benchmark planner, which is this document here. I'll just skip up to the top so we can see right at the beginning. Ooh. Okay, so you're probably all familiar with this, but I'll just cover the 4 stages. The 4 stages are, first of all, identifying precisely what the role requires. So carrying across some of that information from the job profile or the consultation into the sections below. Then we identify the behaviors, then the work aptitudes, and then the core traits. So part 1, this is just a summary of the areas that are likely to lead to high performance. So you can see I put some in there from the job profile itself. So managing supply chain, managing business processes. Likely key performance indicators are the management of the supply chain, people management, leadership, financial control and compliance, and key interactions. Key interactions give an indication of the importance of communication between various parties. And then from them, we can lead into behaviors. There's a description on the first page of all of the behaviors. And all the way down on the next page, we start the process of selecting them. And there's a number of steps on the left-hand side, which basically take you from selecting the first 2 to selecting the bottom 2 and then the ones in between. So based on the job profile, it's no surprise that the first 2 are both gold. There was a plethora of gold within that job profile. So the first 2 are finishing and evaluating. And then right at the bottom, if we go to the 2 that are right at the bottom, which are the steps in between, steps 3 and 4, you can see that the last 2 are focusing. We saw no focusing at all on that profile, and we saw no innovating. So follow it down in the steps, first 2, bottom 2, and then the ones in between. And this is what we end up with in terms of the ranking order. Finishing, evaluating, top 2 are gold, then delivering, then coordinating, supporting, and initiating, focusing, and innovating. So that's the ranking stage complete. What we're now doing is rating them. And you can see the rating scale up here on the top. So 8, critically important, all the way down to number 1, potentially counterproductive. So finishing and evaluating, you would expect to see a rating that's fairly high, 8 or 7. With that sort of, because obviously they're your top 2. And you can see I've rated finishing 8, evaluating 7, and then delivering 7 and coordinating 7 as well. So just rated them all the way down. And that's as simple as it gets. All the time that you are putting these in, check back to page 1, where you have these key indicators of what performance looks like. So be absolutely clear you've covered those. And obviously, if you're doing a consultation process, then be clear that everyone in the room understands what each particular dimension is and is comfortable with the ranking and the rating. And then you do exactly the same for work aptitudes. Again, there's a listing of the work aptitudes. And then after that, there's a sheet for the ranking and the rating. So a little bit of a word of warning here between correlations. And this is often missed when people are completing job benchmarks. So if you have put finishing as your number 1 behavior, then there are work aptitudes, or there is a work aptitude that correlates, not exactly, but would correlate with that. And that's the same with a number of the behaviors as you work through. So if you've picked finishing, then really, in terms of work aptitudes, you would expect to see orderly and efficient as your first work aptitude, because there is a correlation between them. Not a direct correlation, but there is a correlation. Likewise, investigative and analytical fits quite well with evaluating, so you'd expect to see that quite high. Further down, our least preferred behavior, our last behavior was innovating. And so you can see that we have creative and artistic as our last work aptitude, because again, there's a correlation there. So be very conscious of that there is a correlation between behaviors and work aptitudes. It's really frustrating when I'm looking at benchmarks when I see, finishing as number one and outgrowing finishing as number one behavior and outgoing and expressive, for example, as the number one work aptitude. There is no correlation in that at all. So just a little bit of thought in terms of what would fit where with the work aptitudes. Then we go on to the core traits. Again, a description of the core traits here, and then the ranking sheet and the rating sheet. Exactly the same as before. So I have conscientious as number one, conscientiousness, because I think, again, there's a correlation between conscientiousness and high levels of finishing. I've got self-motivation second, because I believe there's a correlation between that being motivated to succeed, there's a little bit of a link there to delivering and also in the job profile. So again, be conscious of where there might be correlations between the behaviors you've already chosen and the core traits themselves. And that's the work, the benchmark planner completed. So you can now input that into the system. So I'm now going to flick to another screen. Right, okay, so we're now in the PRISM portal. I've signed into demo access, as you can see here. So first thing to do is to look at where we put the benchmark when you've completed the benchmark planner. So as the name suggests, go into benchmarks in the top right-hand corner. Just need to move my little window here. In the top right-hand corner, you can see create benchmark. Click on there, ask you for the information that you already have, put that in, and then start to put the information in as per the benchmark planner. As simple as that, just carry it across from one to the other. And then all we need to do is see what it looks like. And so we're in benchmarks already. Bring that up again. So we can see what it looks like by searching for the name we called it. It was called Emerald. So we key in Emerald, see what comes up. There it is there. Supply Chain Manager. We borrowed this one from the online accreditation. So let's have a look and see what it looks like. So view the document. And this is what it looks like. So as you would suspect indeed from the benchmark planner, high level of gold, followed by delivering, very little green, both in initiating and innovating, medium level of blue, and no focusing at all. So that's what's come out from the benchmark planner. And then looking at that in tabular form, both for the behaviors and the work aptitudes and core traits. And you can see in the tabular form, you have the critical factors, which are the top three highlighted. And this is a descending order from those high preferences to the low. So finishing, evaluating and delivering, top three. Orderly, investigative, mathematical and logical, top three for work aptitudes, and core traits, top three here. So you can see exactly what it looks like. So really simple process. First of all, understand the role, complete the job benchmark, key it into the system, and then you can look and see what it actually looks like. Good. And now we need to compare it to something. So we've created it, we've put it into the system. Now we're going to look at creating it and interpreting it. Not creating it, sorry, we're going to look at viewing it and interpreting it. So we go back to the candidates. We'll pick some candidates to have a look and compare it against. I'll just wait for the candidates to appear. There's one I want to look at in particular, which I know is called Andy. Something, I can't remember exactly what. I think it was Andy number one. There it is, Andy test 01. So that's one of the ones that we're going to use as a dummy for this particular session. So I found that particular candidate. But before I click on it, on either the map or any of the reports, I need to let the system know what I want it to show. So to do that, we go to Customize Report, click up here. Initially, I only want to look at the underlying line. I don't want to look at the consistent or adapted line. And I'll explain the reason for that as we move on. And obviously, I want to select the benchmark. So select here. Again, you can either go find it on the list or you can filter within the results. So this is the one we want, Emerald Pharmaceutical. Select, close this. So we now know that we've customized the output so we can pick our particular candidate. So I'm going to look at Andy test 01. I'm going to look at the map first, see what comes out from the map. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So benchmark is in green. Benchmarks are always in green. The candidate at this stage is in the underlying line, so that's in red. Now, generally, I would use the underlying line for recruitment if the candidate is coming from another business. So in another business, there would be a different culture, a different environment that they're working in. So the adapted line may not be that accurate. And if the adapted line isn't that accurate, then the consistent line isn't going to be either. So I would look at the underlying line in terms of a reflection of that person's natural innate characteristics, their natural behaviors. And I would see where they fitted with that. Once I've looked at the underlying line, I might then look at the adapted line to see how they flexed in their previous role in their previous company. Bear in mind that doesn't necessarily mean that they will be able to do the same, but it does give you some indication. So let's have a look at this. So the top two were finishing and evaluating. So you can see the candidate here over 75 on both. So, a very strong match for these two dimensions, very strong indeed. On the third, it was delivering. And you can see that the benchmark is over 75, but the candidate's below 35. So that would be a strong mismatch. And as we work our way around, you can see here focusing was our lowest. And the candidate has a fair amount of focusing. So that could potentially cause problem. In fact, the candidate's strength in red is coming more from focusing than delivering, and we would want that the other way around. So it's a big question mark here. In terms of coordinating and supporting, I would say that both of those are probably okay. So the candidate's at the midpoint. We want a little bit more than that, between 65 and 75. That's a little bit of a mismatch, but perhaps not critical. But the two that stand out here in green, initiating, we wanted the midpoint, but this candidate's a lot higher. So there could be a big mismatch there. So the candidate, it will be looking to behave in the initiating style, behave in that way, and they will be perhaps frustrated because they can't do that. Innovating, yes, there is a mismatch, but probably not that critical. And if we look here, you can see exactly what we've just been discussing on the tabular form. So you can see the top two are matched, the third is not, and you can see the gaps between the two. And you can also see the same on the work aptitudes and core traits. So you can see here, there were some big gaps between the two that need to be explored. So we wanted a high level of orderly and efficient in terms of the work aptitude. It's much lower. And you can see here, this one's a match. This is perfect match, but it's in the center, so perhaps not a critical dimension anyway. But the bottom two that we wanted in terms of the benchmark, the candidate is much higher in both of those. So a key question mark there. So that's the particular role. Now, what we don't know at this stage is how this candidate is currently adapting. So we know that the benchmark is asking for a high level of delivering. We know the candidate is currently naturally not exhibiting that behavior, but maybe they are flexing into that in their current role. So what we can do, we can close this one down. We can go back into Customize Report. This time we can show the adapted line. We keep the benchmark the same. And let's just see what that does to the map itself. Okay, so interesting. So our top two, we're finishing and evaluating, naturally both high, but the candidate in their current role is adapting back down on both of those particular dimensions. On delivering, we were looking perhaps for this underlying line to see some movement upwards. What we're seeing is actually it's gone back in. So an even larger gap than we had before. On focusing, we were concerned about focusing because it was a very low behavior on the benchmark. And you can see it's grown even more when we look at the adapted line. So again, that forcefulness coming from focusing would probably get in the way in terms of the role that we're looking for. This is okay. This is okay. Initiating, you can see some flex down. So maybe this candidate is able to flex the initiating down when they need to. So avoiding some of that frustration. And the innovating, the candidates flex that down as well. So maybe with the green, there's some positives there, but there's some huge warning signs in terms of the adaptation down for finishing and evaluating and delivering. However, you need to be absolutely certain that the adaptation line is valid. So if the person is in a completely different role, they're in a completely different company, completely different culture, the adaptation line may not be valid anyway. So it's there for you to look at, but it needs to come with a big health warning. What you do need to do every time you're looking at a map and you're interpreting this data is you need to ask questions to justify whether these particular scores are correct. So in other words, ask questions that show whether this person is exhibiting high levels of finishing and high levels of evaluating, and show whether they have the opportunity or they have the capability to flex into delivery. And there is a document in resources that will help you do that because we've broken down all of the behavioral dimensions into a series of questions. So you can see a number of questions, situational questions for any of the dimensions or all of the dimensions that you want to use. And certainly on the critical ones, that would be absolutely key, that you make sure you are asking candidates questions that help them show where they are exhibiting the dimensions that you want. Okay, so that's how we look at the map. Let's now look at the report itself. So I'll work our way down to the key sections. First of all, we can see the map. The map's same as we looked at before. So it's got the underlying line on the adapted line. Obviously, if you just took out the adapted and shown the underlying, then the map would reflect that as well. The custom report would reflect that. We go down to section 4. Section 4 is an identification of the benchmark versus candidate comparison. A little bit of an introduction. And then we have the interpretation of the map. Now, this is, if you like, taking away some of the hard work for you. It's common sense. So when we look at the top 2, which we're finishing and evaluating, we identified that as a strong match.
Yeah.
And the system's done the same. We identified a strong match for coordinating and a mismatch for initiating and delivering. Delivering was one of the top 3, and then likely mismatches for some of the other. So it's just a way of interpreting the information from the map. And it gives you a brief description for those as well. So I would say when you're interpreting, this can be a useful document. Don't lose sight of the critical factors, the top 3 and the bottom 2. If there is flex in the bottom 2, so in other words, if the benchmark is asking for a very low preference and the candidate is above the 50 mark, the chances are that candidate might be frustrated if they're not able to fulfill that behavior in the role. So be really conscious of that. Good. So any questions so far? Lisa?
Nothing at the moment, but if anybody has any questions, please pop them in chat.
Be the shortest webinar ever.
It's obviously you're making it extremely clear to everybody.
Hopefully.
I think you're good to go.
Do we want to look at one more comparison?
So do we want to find somebody, a
No,
different
not
person?
necessarily. Happy not to do that. I mean, it's the 3 stages we've covered are
Very clear,
understanding the
says
role.
Laura.
Good, that's nice. Creating the benchmark, putting the benchmark in the system, and then doing the comparison. I think I would come back to what I said at the beginning. Don't just think of benchmarks for recruitment. Yes, they certainly have a place in recruitment, but think of them also for development, particularly in the coaching context where you have people you're coaching. Think of the power of having a benchmark alongside that candidate map. It can give you some really good conversations. So I think, other than to remind you, the next webinar is in June, and that's the 360 process. Charlie and I will be working together on that one. I'll be managing the outputs and Charlie will be managing the inputs. So that might be slightly longer than our normal ones. Other than that, hope that was useful. Don't forget, you can always pick up the recording on resources, and we'll see you again at the next. Any final questions, Lisa?
Amir's just asked, did you ever use AI for benchmarking? Um, and also, I just want to reiterate that now benchmarks are free.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay, so we are about to send out an AI consultation document. We are very conscious of AI. We're conscious it's out there. We're conscious of the positives. We're conscious of perhaps some of the downsides, but we want views from our practitioners and distributors. So we are about to send out a consultation document. And that might lead us to constructing benchmarks through AI. Certainly, it would help in terms of minimizing the process. But at this stage, nothing is on the table or off the table. We just want to gather some views and then develop a strategy. Hope that helps. Good. Excellent. Well, good to see you all. And we see you again at the next. So thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody. Cheerio.